Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 11th of November, 2022, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today, we've got Patrick Henningsen and Vanessa Beeley. Welcome to the programme, both. Now, we're going to get straight on very quickly with, well, the economy. And, the UK, or the Office for National Statistics, has announced that UK's GDP is down 0.2% in the period July to September 2022. And, of course, all the mainstream headlines talking about us entering recession. The Bank of England believing we're going to enter the longest running recession in history. ONS says that the quarterly fall was driven by manufacturing, which saw widespread declines across most industries. Services were flat overall, but consumer-facing industries fared badly, with a notable fall in retail. I think we haven't seen anything just yet, but don't worry, Jeremy Hunt is riding to the rescue, although he does say that there's no illusion. There's a tough road ahead, one which requires extremely difficult decisions to restore confidence and economic stability. So things not looking so great in the UK. But just to make the point here, Patrick, if we look at GDP in the UK over the last several decades, really what we see is we have not yet recovered from the economic collapse of 2008, but equally the government economic decisions around COVID, and GDP still has not reached levels, or it hadn't reached levels above those just in the run up to the lockdowns and so on in early 2020. And since we've headed south again, we're not likely to for some time to come. But in the US, it's a very similar picture.
Yeah, I think both the all economies, European, UK, and US, and Canada as well, are going to be suffering from stagflation, which is a stagnant economy. Nobody wants to use the big R word, which is recession, which used to mean 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, and now they're just expunged it from the vocabulary altogether because nobody wants to own that politically. So, stagnant economy plus creeping inflation, and a lot of things that are driving inflation are to do with, for instance, fuel and energy. And the governments do not seem to have any solutions to that, or they're not implementing any policies that are going to radically reverse that. So we're creeping along. And meanwhile, a lot of prices of staples are compounding. So the month on month or year on year inflation is actually compounding as we speak. So that's not going to make life any easier for anybody who's struggling to make ends meet each month, because I don't see the pay rises coming that correspond with the rises in food and essential goods, fuel, and energy.
Indeed, but of course, one of the big economic problems we've been facing for a couple of years now has been the lack of availability, supply side problems, and China a big part of that with their continuing COVID zero policy. But RT here reporting that China's perhaps easing that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think there seems to be a sea change in thinking in China. They've been absolutely devastated. I mean, China has to balance two things, which is keeping control of society, but also keeping their economy ticking along. And the zero COVID policy is just being seen as one of the things that has been devastating for the Chinese economy. So I think they're rethinking this, and so this is covering this. It's one of the only news outlets I found that is covering this. So I know the British government will deem this as Russian propaganda, but here we're going to put it up. So the global markets have responded to a change in Chinese COVID policy. This is really important, and so there are other factors around, including the U.S. election, that might have caused the markets to react positively, just because people know where things are going in the next couple of months or the next quarter. But when China does a major policy shift on something like COVID, i.e., lockdowns and shutting down Beijing or Shanghai, for instance, and the markets react positively to it, this is really encouraging because it might send a message to other governments that maybe this is what you need to do right now going forward in this situation, and not this winter pursue sort of draconian policies that might destroy economic growth and disrupt supply chains and all the rest of it. So I think for China, I don't think there's there room to maneuver economically, considering the trade war, the diplomatic war with the United States, and also with other countries in Europe who adopting a more strident policy towards China for whatever geopolitical reasons. This is one area that China can alleviate some of its economic issues.
Yes. Okay, let's move on to Ukraine then. And well, here's Rishi looking very moody. This is him speaking, apparently, according to the UK government, speaking to Zelensky this morning. And they agreed that they say that they agreed that any Russian withdrawal from the occupied city of Kherson would demonstrate strong progress for Ukrainian forces and reinforce the weakness of Russia's military offensive. But it was right to continue to exercise caution until the Ukrainian flag was raised over the city. So the rhetoric from the UK is as it usually is. In the meantime, Ben Wallace and Rishi Sunak have announced. Here's Ben Wallace with his Ukrainian counterpart. They have announced that the UK is going to complete the delivery of 1,000 additional surface-to-air missiles for the Ukrainian military. The commitment of hundreds more surface-to-air missiles continues our defensive support for Ukraine against Russian aggression and will help Ukraine counter the threat from illegal targeting of critical national infrastructure, is what Ben Wallace had to say. In the meantime, then the JEF was getting together, and here they all are, the various countries involved in this. So this is the Joint Expeditionary Force, and we've got Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and the United Kingdom all represented there. And at that meeting, then they announced that the Netherlands is going to contribute another 100 million euros to the International Fund for Ukraine, and Norway about 145 million euros to the International Fund for Ukraine. So, Patrick, the funding continues, the arms continue to roll in, and therefore the war continues.
Yeah, we're approaching what we called a frozen conflict. This sort of situation where the status quo is something much like the Cold War, or North Korea, South Korea. Russia's quite aware of all of these arms shipments. They're calculating this in, they're tracking them, and so forth. And the reality is that anything that's brought into Ukraine can be sort of liquidated very quickly through Russian missile strikes and things like that. So and by the way, they're also aware of how long it takes for these things to cycle in. A lot of the commitments, like for instance, the U.S. has made for Ukraine in terms of more HIMAR missiles or more sort of defense equipment and gear and so forth. A lot of this stuff is going to be on back order for the next year, maybe two. So not everything is going to make it to the field. A lot of this is also political. These announcements are political. They need to show their support for Ukraine to kind of keep morale up. You can see that this was a big motivation for the U.S. To say that they wanted to pursue peaceful negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, sort of because they didn't want the European partners to lose heart. You can see so much of this is politics and PR at this point. In terms of strategy, things are hardening on the ground there, and positions are hardening, and we might be getting into a situation where you could see negotiations. But meanwhile, all of this gear and all of these sort of defense agreements, which have been great profit centers for Western defense contractors, they'll just keep on trying to roll these in as they go along.
Indeed. And speaking of politics and particularly PR, Vanessa, then we had Sean Penn. We just mentioned this in passing on Wednesday, but I mean, gifting an Oscar to Zelensky, how far does the PR have to roll on?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, this is Sean Penn's third visit. Of course, he's not the only celebrity that has appeared in the company of Zelensky, but Penn has a very extensive history of appearing in the right country at the right time for the oligarchs and the billionaire complex in the United States. And here we don't see any different. Of course, what I find quite extraordinary here, we've got a little video to show him presenting his Oscar to Zelensky. I did see quite a funny comment on Twitter that, well, that'll be melted down and put into the coffers for Zelensky's retirement. With Penn stating that he hopes to see Zelensky in Malibu once Ukraine has won the war, of course. But I don't know if you have the video ready, Mike.
Yeah, let's play it.
You're looking good. Thank you.
This is for you.
Oh, Sean.
Yes.
No.
Please.
That is yours.
No, I feel terrible outside. It's just a symbolic, silly thing.
Yes, but
if I know this is here with you, then I'll feel better and stronger for the fight.
So great honor, but until we will.
When you win, bring it back to Malibu.
Great.
Yes.
Great. Okay.
Because I'll feel much better knowing there's a piece of me here.
It's not from me. It's from Ukraine. That is more. No, only from me. Yeah, please.
The President of Ukraine for outstanding extraordinary.
Thank you.
And I want to show you. The first man who was here was this guy. I think you know him. Come back. That is the date. And here you can read, if you don't know this guy, that is a great honor today.
There are 3 places in the world that all the pride of my life will be. The place where my daughter was born, the place where my son was born, and this. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, I mean, not much more I can add to that, to be honest. I did mention, I mean, Sean Penn, I wrote about previously in relation to COVID-19 and celebrity humanitarianism. Sean Penn is the epitome of that. His core response organization was running mobile PCR centers across the United States. And of course, he was instrumental in pushing the COVID narrative throughout the project's existence. But what I'm coming to here, and Pan is very closely involved in what I'm working on for UK Column, and this is just a bit of a teaser for people. The article hopefully will finally be finished this weekend and published next week. Back in March 2022, Josh Rogan wrote an article for the Washington Post, referenced the Syrian white helmets are ready to help Ukrainians save civilians under Russian attacks. We have seen, if people followed the Syria conflict and followed the exploits of the White Helmets and MI6 military intelligence incubated organization embedded with the terrorist groups inside Syria and tasked with producing the chemical weapon attack stories in order to criminalize the Syrian government, the last being the Douma chemical attack in 2018, which was discredited by the OPCW inspectors who went on the ground to investigate the alleged attack. Basically, what we've been seeing more recently in Ukraine, are particularly in Kiev, are very similar productions, TV productions, news productions on the alleged Russian attacks on civilian infrastructure. We saw a couple that were exposed to be real-time fake attacks. Now, this is very similar to the White Helmet operations in Syria. What I'm writing about, which is based on documents leaked to myself and to UK Column, that both Canada and the United States are looking at funding for the White Helmets to get more involved in Ukraine. And one can only assume they're not going to go to Ukraine, but what they will be doing is offering advice and assistance to the Ukrainians, we assume to the NATO-backed elements within Ukraine that are fighting Russia. We're seeing them anyway promoting the Azov battalions and the anti-Russia rhetoric from inside Syria. Sean Penn is closely connected, of course, through various channels, but also people might remember him being used by the BBC to effectively discredit those that had exposed the role of the white helmets inside Syria. So I'm just drawing together a few of the threads. Other threads are Kosovo, another connection to Kosovo amongst those that are backing the white helmet moves to be more involved in Ukraine. So watch this space next week.
Okay, thank you for that, Vanessa. Now let's move on to back to the UK, and UK government pushing this out this morning. The UK has sanctioned £18.3 billion of Russian assets, and they're saying that this is new data which has been released yesterday, revealing the full effect of UK sanctions on Russia. They're not discussing the effect of UK sanctions on Russia on the UK, but anyway, okay. This is the organization that they've set up, the Office for Financial Sanctions Implementation at the Treasury. And so the numbers have come out of their annual review, which is covering April 2021 until August 2022. And so, of course, the propaganda pieces came out to explain us in numbers, the extent of the sanctions. 18 billion of Russian assets frozen, 1,200 people sanctioned, including 120 oligarchs, more than 120 businesses sanctioned, assets of 19 Russian banks. Russia's GDP predicted to decline by 6.2% in 2022 compared to pre-invasion trend. Russian imports of critical goods dropped by 68% from sanctioning countries. 60% of Russia's foreign reserves immobilized, and over 1,000 foreign businesses have left Russia. And Patrick, you're going to have to, just put that back up on screen 1 second, Stephanie, thanks. Patrick, you're going to have to explain to me how Russian imports of critical goods, having dropped by 68% from sanctioning countries, is a good thing for sanctioning countries.
Well, it depends if they want reliable and affordable supplies of goods, of energy, of fuel, to balance their books, to run their economies, to be sort of in the red, as it were, or to be in the black, as it were. That's the question. So, is it a good thing to restrict markets and to create a bifurcated global economy by cutting out Russia, which is the world's largest overall basket of commodities producer in the world? We're talking about fuel, agricultural products, rare earth minerals, etc., all sorts of stuff in the sort of chemical and agricultural industrial complex. Russia is a main supplier to so many of these different sectors. So, and energy on top of that. Is that something that's good for these countries' economies? And to pay, I don't know, 4 times the price for liquefied natural gas to be transported across the Atlantic Ocean by boat, with lots of disruptions in supply and things like that? Is that something that you can run the first world economy on? That's the question.
Very good question. Now, Vanessa, let's come back then to Israel and Iran.
A couple of days ago, there was an attack on an Iranian oil convoy that was coming in through the Iraq-Syrian border at Al Bukamal. There is some contention over who carried out the attack. Initially, it was believed to have been a United States attack. Now it's more likely to have been an Israeli attack, with the usual claim that the tankers contained weapons and were being sent into Lebanon. The reality, of course, is the 2 tankers that were destroyed were carrying much needed oil reserves for Lebanon, which is at the moment extremely energy deprived, of course, following the port explosion in Beirut a couple of years ago. And 25, well, there are numbers between 15 and 25, but the latest being 25 Syrian Arab Army soldiers and civilians lost their lives in the attack. So the illegal aggression against Syria and against essential civilian supplies continues by Israel.
Yeah, and just very briefly, Vanessa, what if we were to compare the energy situation in Lebanon with Syria at the moment, which country is worse off?
I was just in Lebanon last week. I would say actually they're on a par from an energy perspective. From an economic perspective, Lebanon is actually doing far worse than Syria. To give you an idea, Lebanon now, the Lebanese currency is at more than 30,000 to the dollar. In Syria, we're at around 5,000 to the dollar.
I see. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. If you like what the UK column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us out there. You could pick something up at the UK column shop, but please do share material you find on the various platforms as far and wide as possible. I just want to